What is up guys, Wraec is here with a new video, and today with our first preview of the skills of our new Transcendence Hero that is going to release on Friday, Bloodtide Queen Aranea. A little bit weird considering we already have a queen from the Abyss faction, Scarlet Queen Helora. Apparently the Abyss faction is full of queens. No idea about the royal structures there, but we take it. Pretty slick design, I like it. So let's just hop into the skills and get a first grasp of her skill set. Bloodtide Burst, the active skill, deals damage to one enemy, which is already interesting considering most of the time those skills deal damage to more than one enemy active skills. This is just one enemy. Meanwhile restores all allies HP for X amount of rounds. As always, no numbers included here. If self has at least layers of Queen's Core, consumes layers of Queen's Core to additionally restore them by a certain % of their lost HP and increase their holy damage and crit for X amount of rounds. So we already have some buff capabilities here, holy damage and crit and heal. So taking healer / supporter role here, quite interesting. I like it. It is basically pretty similar to what Aranea does. We have to see how big the holy damage and crit buff is. It could be pretty interesting though. Crit and holy damage are certainly stats that help you deal a lot of damage, and if she's capable of providing a big amount of crit or a big amount of holy damage, especially crit could be that as valuable that you don't really have to take it as imprint, maybe in a situation like Star Expedition. So that is something that could be very interesting and could certainly be very strong. If any enemy is inflicted with Black Kindling, Bloodtide Wrath will be triggered. So, Black Kindling, Bloodtide Wrath and Queen's Core are of course skill effects as always. She does have a lot of skill effects. It seems like all Transcendence Heroes nowadays have those, so let's go over them. This time they conveniently put them right below the active skill, not at the bottom of the skill sheet. A Queen's Core skill effect used to enhance Bloodtide Queen Aranea's active skill, just so again a token skill effect that just serves as a layer to promote further effects on the active skill. As we saw in this situation, it activates the effect of recovering the HP and giving us the holy damage and crit buff. Black Kindling skill effect: when any enemy with Black Kindling dies, inflicts Black Kindling on X amount of random enemies, we don't know if it's one or multiple, without Black Kindling. When Bloodtide Queen Aranea dies, removes Black Kindling from all enemies not stackable. So every enemy can basically have one stack of Black Kindling, and we will have to see how it is inflicted to them. The next skill effect is Bloodtide Wrath. Bloodtide Wrath, for every enemy with Black Kindling, additionally burns random enemies, dealing damage for X amount of rounds. Meanwhile, each attack inflicts Scorching Curse on them for X amount of rounds, with a chance to remove attribute buff from enemies with Black Kindling and a chance to petrify them for X amount of rounds. Bloodtide Wrath will not trigger counterattacks or pursue end attacks. Interesting that they specified that. Usually it isn't the case that skill effects trigger such things, so it seems to be really a separate skill effect. Effects like this that hit a lot of enemies and inflict effects on a lot of enemies. I'm reminded of Saya here. She had this effect where she basically did an additional hit after doing her active skill on all enemies with Mesmerize, I think was her buff's name. And that basically had a chance to stun. And the bad part about that, and why I never really built a proper team with her, was that this additional hit triggered Queen's Guard counterattacks. So basically every time you had a queen in the enemy team where you were guaranteed to hit her with the active skill from the Saya, or nearly guaranteed, and that made her very bad and die pretty fast if you tried to build a secondary team around her. So basically not having that happen here is pretty nice, and certainly will make her a bit stronger against Queen or SQH enemy teams. About Bloodtide Wrath, Scorching Curse is of course one thing. Scorching Curse though, slight problem, they didn't include the description for this, so no idea what they actually mean by that. There was an effect on normal Aranea though that was quite similar. So if we now take a look, that is basically the skill description for regular Aranea, and there we have Scorching Curse. Skill effect: when enemies inflicted with Scorching Curse take damage, they take extra damage. And in game we find it as well. Skill effect: when enemies inflicted with Scorching Curse take damage, they take extra 400% of attack damage, caps at 3000% of Aranea's attack. So basically an extra layer of damage that takes the enemy's attack as base and deals up to a certain percent of that attack as damage to themselves, and that has a cap. If that is the same that is on Transcendence Aranea, that is a pretty fine effect. Nothing too special, nothing too fancy, but certainly has the capability of dealing a fair bit of damage. So back to the skill description, we just were at the point. Meanwhile, each attack inflicts Scorching Curse on them for X amount of rounds. We discussed what Scorching Curse was, with a chance to remove attribute buff from enemies with Black Kindling and a chance to petrify them for X amount of rounds. So the nice part, it is a bit similar to what Saya does with hitting all the Black Kindling enemies. That is rather nice. I would think if we get a proper way to get Black Kindling on the enemies, and not just on one or maybe on multiple, even if it's part of the sublimations, then this could certainly be quite interesting, because she can actually remove a lot of attribute buffs from the enemy, which might be nice in PvP. And we have a chance to petrify, and depending on how many enemies are actually inflicted with Black Kindling and how high her chance to petrify is, she might actually be a decent CC hero for PvP. So that would be quite interesting. Of course, entirely depends on the numbers, and we will have to see how that turns out. The requirement to trigger Bloodtide Wrath is actually not that high, considering that. In the skill description we just looked over, it just says basically if enemy is inflicted with Black Kindling, Bloodtide Wrath will be triggered. So that shouldn't be the case most of the time, considering Black Kindling's description that every time basically an enemy dies, we inflict it on another enemy that doesn't have it yet. So there should always be an enemy with Black Kindling inflicted. The other question is, of course, is this like in Trial of Champions? If you wipe the entire enemy team, there might actually be no enemy anymore inflicted with Black Kindling, but that is a special situation, I guess. So, to talk about the active skill now, the active skill I think is rather strong, has a lot of different layers, and really does do a lot of stuff. Starting off with removing attributes, we can burn the enemy. We can heal our own team, we can buff crit and holy damage, which might be insanely strong, remove attribute buffs, as I said, and even petrify the enemy. So that is quite a lot of stuff in just one active skill, and might be really interesting. There's certainly a lot of perspectives of this that might make it pretty interesting to play this hero. All depends on the other passive skills though, so let's look over those as well. First passive skill, Scorching Shackle, changes the basic attack to deals damage to the enemy with the highest attack, reduces their precision and crit for X amount of rounds, and restores HP for the allies with the lowest HP for X amount of rounds. So smart heal, I like that. Smart heal is always good, healing the allies with the lowest HP, that is always quite nice. And we have an option to reduce the precision and crit for X amount of rounds. This is not that spectacular, to be honest. It is a decent basic skill, but I think if the basic skill is really interesting to use or not will most likely depend on the sublimations that they add to it. Some healing capabilities like Mockman or some self-buff capabilities can go a long way and make this really a really good basic. For now, I would say it's decent. Nothing bad to say about it. If the heal is strong, might be quite kind of interesting. Certainly not a bad skill. When the battle starts, Blazing Agony passive skill. When the battle starts, or when self is in the battle as a substitute, inflicts Black Kindling on the enemy with the lowest HP. When any enemy with Black Kindling dies, restores self HP. So that is rather nice, actually. So there's a very low requirement to actually get Black Kindling on a random enemy. We just inflicted from the beginning So basically, if you put an active or an energy artifact on her and she does an active skill on turn 1, there will be a enemy with Black Kindling, so we should trigger her Bloodtide Wrath every time. That is quite interesting. I wonder if Black Kindling spreads, so like if one enemy dies, it is inflicted on 2 enemies or something like that. That would be rather interesting. And especially interesting against teams like the Star Alchemist Homes team that use heroes that revive a lot. We saw teams with like 2 carries and an Ezreal, so like 3 enemies that revive. If those spread Black Kindling over all of your heroes, that would be kind of interesting. A little heal when an enemy with Black Kindling dies is always alright. I wonder if they do something like with Mockman. Mockman also has his way of inflicting his Omen of Rift, is it in his case? In her case, of course, Black Kindling, on enemies in his second passive skill, and that was severely enhanced with the sublimations. So I wonder if they add a sublimation to enhance that capability of Aranea as well, and that would be rather interesting, might make it necessary to go for passive 2 sublimations again. If we get like 2 heroes, enemies with Black Kindling at the start of the battle, or when she does an active skill or something, that would make her a lot stronger and would certainly be interesting. In any way, I think that is a decent way to inflict Black Kindling, and might make it very interesting to go for that. One thing that would be kind of bad if it was like, if the enemy hero that has Black Kindling on him needs to die for another hero to get Black Kindling. So we kind of have to spread that a little bit to make it efficient. But it seems like that is the intended way to end up with multiple heroes with Black Kindling. Even though, did we see that anywhere? No, I don't think so. No. In none of her skills there was a way to actually inflict Black Kindling other than in that one yet. So that is kind of interesting. I wonder if they really put that into the sublimations. That would make her base version without sublimations rather weak. It would be very similar to Mockman, actually. Let's read the last passive skill first before we go into any judgment here. Queen's Command: at the end of each round, for every enemy with Black Kindling, grants self layer of Queen's Core and increases self damage reduction for X amount of rounds. When self takes damage dealt by basic attacks or active skills from enemies with Black Kindling, burns all enemies dealing damage for X amount of rounds. Meanwhile, restores all allies HP for X amount of rounds and increases their all damage reduction for X amount of rounds. We said that a lot. No, again, no way to actually spread Black Kindling other than to have the hero that initially gets it at the start of the battle and killing that one. So that is rather interesting. I think we are going to see some pretty major sublimations and some pretty necessary sublimations on that hero. I think they need to include some way to inflict Black Kindling on the hero, and I could imagine something like every time she does an active skill, she also inflicts Black Kindling on an enemy. Then in that case we might see it on the active skill sublimations. So that is something I fully expect. I fully expect to see a mostly relevant and mostly necessary sublimation that spreads Black Kindling or inflicts it on heroes. A skill set is like it's really worded in a way that you would think there are multiple enemies Black Kindling, even though her base skills that we just read don't have the capability to do so. So that is rather interesting and something I didn't even notice on my first read of that. Grant self layers of Queen's Core is also a nice thing. We have self damage reduction increase, and we have an all damage reduction increase and heal for the allies. 2 things that I really like. It might make really tanky allies, actually. If you think about it, we have Mystic Fairy Freya with her all damage reduction increase, and that is quite a noticeable damage reduction. On Mystic Fairy Freya, it is basically every time your heroes attack, they get a buff from Mystic Fairy Freya, increasing their attack and all damage reduction. And having another source of all damage reduction for your allies here, maybe even something that can be elevated with sublimations, would be really huge support and interesting for tanky teams, maybe interesting, maybe even, we might even see a new meta, possibly. we have to see. Currently, we saw in IDA that we have a CC and Holmes Star Alchemist Holmes meta. Maybe we see some tanky teams again, something in the range of Panda teams eventually. Or just some tanky teams in general that use Aranea and Mystic Fairy Freya to buff their defensive capabilities. That would be really interesting and something I'm looking forward to. In general, we have kind of a counterattack, not really counterattack, when self-takes damage dealt by basic attacks or active skills from enemies with Black Kindling. We have a burn on all enemies. If that might be strong, she might even be capable of being a good damage dealer. In any way, that is quite interesting in PvE, as we have Phoenix Synergy. Phoenix Synergy, due to the fact that we now have a hero that is good to use in a team, or will likely be good to use in PvE teams, and that also burns the enemy, which is something we didn't quite have for a long time. Apart from Sun Devourer Eos, but her burn is kind of bad. On her second active skill, after she with her first active skill she still burns, but with the second she doesn't, and that was always a bit weird. But here we see kind of a very reliable burn, so that is pretty cool actually, and I kind of like that. Also the requirement to get Queen's Core, which we need for our active skill, as I can remind you, consumes layers of Queen's Core to additionally restore them by a certain percent of their lost HP and increases their hold damage and crit for X amount of rounds, so is responsible for this one. It's actually not that high. So overall I would say we have a very strong hero here, but one that I think might be reliant on her sublimations. So I'm pretty eager to see the sublimations once they introduce the hero on Friday. I would think there will be at least 1 or 2 sublimation skills that will be required to get good use out of her. She certainly doesn't seem like a Transcendence hero you would want to start with, that you would want to build first. That I don't really see. She is kind of a team player. Buffs are certainly a big part of her skill set, and making good use of buffs just requires you to have a bit of a team that can make use of them, and in general, if you have your first Transcendence hero, you don't really have a proper team around that. So I would say she's a later Transcendence hero, but a good one at that, it seems. Seems to have quite good buff capabilities, heal capabilities, burn synergy. All this stuff seemed to be very interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to actually seeing this Petrify and the Scorching Curse. Those are 2 things I'm also very interested in. If the Petrify is good, if she gets some CC capabilities, maybe we have some low-key Transcendence Saya, which I would really like. I like Transcendence Saya, but we talked about why she failed in my opinion, so if she kind of has the same skill set, the same skill idea, that would be rather cool. So very much looking forward to that. I'm expecting a pretty good hero. I'm expecting a hero we will see in PvE teams and Star Expedition teams. So definitely a hero that you might be interested in building if you already have some Transcendence heroes. I will do another video later on Friday where we talk about the sublimations, and I will add up on this and basically tell you which sublimations I think are good, and we will talk about the skill numbers of course as well. So please write me in the comment what you think about the hero. Will you build her? Is it a hero that you like? Do you like the skill set? Which part of it are you looking forward to? Those are all questions that I care about. And then anyway, I wish you guys a great day, and we will see us in the next one.